beyondthebook.org. We're going to hear tonight her adventures with the monarchs, but she's got a river adventure. She's got a lot of great information on that web page. That'll keep you occupied for a long, long time. So, well, I'm sure we'll mention during the program again, but beyondthebook.org. Author, educator, and adventurer, Sara Dykman biked the entire route of the migrating monarch butterfly, pedaling 10,201 miles from Mexico to Canada and back on an old mountain bike, weighed down by all the supplies she needed for 9 months on the road. First person ever to bike the monarch's migration route, a committed butter biker. Sara joins us to share their adventure of the monarch's epic story. Welcome, Sara.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me. This is a little bit of a hybrid, a bit of everything. So I'm happy to be here in multiple ways, and happy to talk about my trip and the butterfly. The point of my 10,000 mile adventure following the monarchs was to basically be a publicity stunt. People will forget to notice the amazing creatures in their own backyard, but then this lady will come down the road and I'll say, hey, I biked here from Mexico, and they'll be like, ah, and then I'll be like, and so did like the mom of that butterfly in your own yard. And so it's sort of just a way to add a little bit of humanity to the migration, and to help people recognize this incredible phenomenon happening in our own lives. So I'm going to share some photos of that adventure and some more adventures the monarchs have taken me on. If you think of a question, it's easy to forget them. And this is like, I don't know, maybe folks in the audience can interrupt, but it might be a little confusing. So it might be easier just to hold them. If you're doing something, if you're virtual, you can put it in the chat so you don't forget. And yeah, we'll see how this goes. I'll share my screen. First slide on my presentation, which is me having absolutely no idea what I'm doing. And I feel like people always think like, oh, you must be an expert. Oh, you must have known everything about butterflies. Oh, you must have known where you were going or what route you were going to take. No, like when I decided to do this trip, I knew I wanted to follow the monarchs. I knew they started every spring in Mexico. I knew they went to Canada. And that's about all I knew. And I made quite a few mistakes. This is maybe like the first week in Mexico, and I had just taken the wrong turn. And then this woman told me to take this road. And I just remember sitting there being like, that is not a road. That's something else. But I think the best way to learn is by just going out and figuring it out as you go. And so that's what I did. And the same thing goes with my bike. Before I started my trip, I was not an author. I was not a writer. I journaled when I was on adventures, but that's about where it ended. But about halfway through my trip, I realized, man, I have a lot to say. And I decided I'm going to write a book. And I've done a lot of other adventures. I've canoed the Missouri River. I've biked from Bolivia to Texas. I've walked across the country. But this was the first one that I felt like what I had to say, what mattered. It wasn't just about the adventure. It was about the monarchs. And so that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. But first, I have to break your heart. I love butterflies, but I love frogs more. So when I'm not biking with butterflies, and I'm not in Mexico hanging out with my friends there, I try and pick up seasonal work studying frogs. For the last decade, it's mostly been in California, studying there's 3 species that live in the high country in the mountains of California. And they're really spectacular. I just have to, for all you nature nerds out there, the frog in the top corner, that's a mountain yellow-legged frog. Their tadpoles take 3 years to develop. So they have such a short growing season. They have to be in permanent water. Unfortunately, trout were introduced to the Sierra, and the places that trout can survive are the same places these frogs can. But that being said, these creatures are amazing. These frogs and toads are amazing, but they're terrible traveling companions. They don't go very far. They will spend pretty much their whole life within a small area, very much unlike the monarch butterfly. So the monarch is pretty much the perfect traveling companion for a cyclist. They go about 60, the migration as a whole, not individual monarchs, but the migration as a whole progresses about 60 miles a day in the spring. They spread out over a vast range. Here's their range. So I didn't have to be very picky about my route. As long as I was in this yellow zone, which is the summer, or if I was in the green area in the spring, which was green is spring, or orange is their fall, route, I was on the route of the monarch. So sometimes people think I was following a very specific monarch. No, I was just going where they would go. And my goal was, of course, to see monarchs, but if I didn't see one, that wasn't a terrible thing, because the true point of my trip was to meet the people that could help them. And so the best way that we can help monarchs is if you live in any of these areas with color, the yellow, the green, or the orange, I know my colors, is plant plants for them. We have two types of plants. We have native nectar plants, and that's where they'll drink nectar. So that's pretty much any plant with a flower, and milkweed. And I'm actually going to backtrack. This is one species of milkweed that I love. It's called swamp milkweed. And you'll notice all the milkweeds have like these shooting stars. There's so many different color milkweeds. Their leaves look very different. They're called milkweed because most of the time, if you tear a bit of the leaf, this milky sap will come out. Not all species do that. Some species have hairy leaves, some species have smooth leaves, but most of them all have this pretty iconic kind of shooting star shape, and they create those seed pods with all the fluff. So everyone that's played outside in the summer knows how fun it is to throw those seed puffs around. But if there's no milkweed, there's no monarchs. So when I talk about monarchs, I'm almost always talking about milkweed, because it's just such a simple equation: no milkweed, no monarchs. Now, in case you don't know, and I apologize if some of this is basic and you already know it, but the milkweed is the only food source of the monarch caterpillar, and that milky sap is actually poison. So most herbivores avoid milkweed, but there are some specialists that, including monarch caterpillars, that eat the leaves and then store that poison in their bodies and render their adult selves poisonous. So this is a male monarch. He has his scent glands on his hind wings there. He's actually nectaring, so he's not laying eggs on this milkweed. He's just getting nectar from the plant. But excuse me, his wings are bright orange to warn predators, hey, when I was a caterpillar, I ate a poisonous plant, you better not eat me. So milkweed and monarchs have this very interesting relationship, and they're very much linked. That you can't have a monarch without a milkweed. And I'll say that 100 times, but it's the most important message. It's my obligation as a person that loves butterflies to say it. So here's the route again. The only thing I haven't mentioned is that there are a few blue dots, and the blue dots are where they overwinter. So the monarchs have a vast range in the summer and a very narrow range in the winter. So in the summer, you might be lucky to see 20, 30, 40 in a day. In the winter, you'll be lucky if you see 20 million in a day. And so it's quite the phenomenon. If you go down, there's multiple overwintering sites. For the sake of time, I'm only going to talk about these eastern monarchs that fly mostly to Mexico. If we have time and interest, I could talk about Florida and California. But for now, this is what it looks like in Mexico. And that is millions of monarchs, thousands on the branches. Scientists don't count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They'd be there for their whole lives to try and count them. Instead, they'll count the amount of space that the monarchs take up. And it's estimated, I think it's between 10 and 50 million monarchs per hectare of land. And a hectare is about 2.5 acres. So lots and lots of monarchs. So many monarchs, in fact, that the branches can break from their collective weight. And like I said, when I started my trip, I didn't know a whole lot, but I knew I wanted to see the monarchs here in Mexico. And so this is where I went. And I got on my bike at this spot in Mexico, and I started biking. Simple as that. And you'll see the first day there are monarchs. I'm going down the road with a bunch of monarchs, and I'm like, oh yeah, all those people that said I was gonna die because it's too hard and too far, they're wrong. And then of course the road turned and the monarchs just went off into the forest, and I sat there feeling pretty silly and also thinking, man, Canada is very far away because already mile 2 I am ditched by the monarchs. By mile 10 I had gone the wrong way and was completely lost, but it worked out. Spoiler alert, I survived, and in the end this was my route. So that red line is 10,201 miles, more or less. I started, like I said, in Michoacan. I went north into the Midwest. I stopped over at my parents' house in Kansas City, where I'm at now, up into Canada, the little East Coast loop, and then back. Now, when I left, I pretty much knew I was going to go from Mexico to Canada with a stop at my parents' house for a shower and some food. Nothing else was planned. But as I started making my way, I started reaching out to teachers and saying, hey, I want to come to your school if you'll let me, and talk to your students about science and nature and adventures and conservation. And teachers would say yes. And then I would do a presentation, and maybe a newspaper reporter would be there, and then someone would post an article that was written in the newspaper, and all of a sudden I just started receiving more and more invitation. And I tried to say yes. It got harder and harder to say yes. The first time I said no was to a presentation in North Dakota. I like really did honestly consider adding that, whatever it was going to be, like 1,000 miles. But in the end, I had to say no. But I tried to say yes, and that's where all these squiggles come from. It's just me saying yes and going with the flow. Now, the reason I could do this is because I had everything I needed on my bike. So this was my setup. That's just an old, I think a 1989 steel mountain bike frame. And the front panniers, these bags are store-bought, and in them I had my, well, actually I have a picture of what I had. So my front panniers are sleeping bag, computer, sleeping pad, journal, light, purse stuff. When I would go to schools, I'd always tell the kids, this was my bedroom and my office. The rear panniers, I'll backtrack, maybe one of you might notice them. Those are actually made from old kitty litter buckets. And in them they held, let's see, my tools, usually about a day's worth of food, cooking supplies. My tent was strapped to the back. I had my rain gear, warm gear. This bag in this picture is actually simply a bag, and I would put my writing outfit in that bag at night, and it would be my pillow. And I always bragged about how high tech that was. But that's my stuff, and it weighed a lot. I went really slow. I went about 60 miles a day at about 10 miles an hour. But if you do the math, there's 24 hours in a day. So I had a lot of time to just take my time, explore, stop, eat. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't like a feat of athleticism. So I guess the only other thing I'd wanted to note is, if I back up, I think it's really important to remember that you don't need the fanciest gear. You know, we're always buying new stuff, but there's something beautiful about making do with old and used and reused, and the monarchs need us to. So this, yes, of course we need to give them habitat, but there's this bigger overarching issue of climate change and the drain that we're putting on our planet. And so I think part of my call to action was also just to find the beauty in that used stuff. I actually think my bike is really beautiful, and I laugh when people scoff at it, because I'm like, this bike has gotten me thousands and thousands of miles. So that's the bike. And because I had this setup, because I have everything I need, I didn't need a plan. And so I felt free every day. I just would, when I was hungry, I'd stop and eat. And when I was tired, I'd stop and camp. And I was on the road for 8.5 months, and I never once paid to camp. Most of the time I had to camp in plain sight, especially in places like Texas where there's just no public land at all. And I got good at relying on that kind of in plain sight method. This is in Texas. That's the highway, that's my tent. And people are always like so scared for me, but I always felt safer with this method of camping, because I actually do feel a little vulnerable if I'm camping in a campground at night, because that's where people are going to go to mess with a camper. No one is going to be like, hey, you want to go 10 miles out of town and see if someone's camping for the first time in a century behind that one bush? No one's going to do that. So by the time the sun went down, by the time I was in my tent, I always felt really, really safe. The other important thing about this way of traveling is I didn't want to stress about having to bike 100 miles to reach a campground, or I didn't want to have to say no to one opportunity because I'd already booked reservations down the road. But also, this is how the monarchs travel. The monarchs fly all day, nectaring, looking for milkweed, laying eggs, mating, and then at night they gotta camp somewhere. They gotta sleep. And some days they get lucky and there's everything they need maybe in your yard, and the other days they don't. It's a cornfield. And so I think calling on attention, how important it is to give these travelers, these butterfly travelers, these stepping stones from Mexico to Canada, it's just so important. And I feel viscerally how important that is. The other great thing about biking is you're going like the perfect speed between too slow and too fast to stop a lot. And my trip was about monarch butterflies, but it was really about the snakes and the toads and the frogs and the birds. Scissortail flycatchers are everywhere in Oklahoma and Texas, but they will never cease to amaze me. But this little toadlet wins cutest animal of the trip award. Here's most beautiful, little rough green snake. I love rough green snakes, and I just love all snakes actually, and I think they're just such a good reminder of our relationship right now, our culture's relationship to wilderness and wildness. Look at our yards. Look at our relationship to snakes. We are so scared of wild, and the monarchs need us to reframe and rethink what that means. And they need us to start seeing the beauty in the wilderness, seeing the beauty in the wild, and of course, seeing the beauty in these snakes. Most scary animal award goes to this guy here. There's this, some people call it type 2 fun, which is type 1 fun is like fun in the moment, like, yeah, I'm eating ice cream, this is fun. Type 2 fun is, this is gonna be a good story, right now this is terrible. And getting sprayed by the skunk would have been an epic story and amazing type 2 fun. I did not get sprayed, but, and sometimes I regret that, but this little guy, again, is such an important reminder of like just paying attention. Like, look at this animal that lives with us in our yards and on our highways, and we take them all for granted. But that is an adorable animal if you really stop and think about it. Now I've mentioned I mentioned scary animal, and then I mentioned camping and not being scared. Truly 100% the scariest thing on the road were cars. Please slow down when you see a cyclist. It really only takes a few seconds, and it's important. It makes a difference. But some of the cars just zoomed by, and then I'll never forget, and I've told the story a million times, but there was a motorcyclist in Mexico, and I was on like the most boring, like just this really boring, really hot road, just trying to get through the day. And I see this motorcyclist, and he's coming up, and he's going slower than the rest of the traffic. And I can tell that as he's getting closer, he's slowing down. And my first reaction is like, I'm going to pretend I don't see him, because I'm an introvert. I don't want to talk to people all the time. I just wanted to get where I was going. I was hot, I was tired. And so I'm like contemplating just like pretending that there's not a motorcyclist parking or like stopping right in front of me. But, you know, right, I decided to stop, and I don't know where I'm going with this, other than he wanted to see if I wanted ice cream. And so, yes, strangers can be scary. Yes, it can be scary to be on the road by yourself, but because you're vulnerable, you just are so much more open to the possibility of meeting good people too. And I got so many invitations across the country. So I got invitations, of course, from networking, but also just riding my bike down the road and someone saying, hey, you want to come to my house? And I tried to say yes. I couldn't always say yes, but I tried to. And I said yes to this ice cream. I also said yes to ice cream in Canada. This is Margaret's house. She's a dairy farmer. She invited me via like a friend of a friend, and that's homemade ice cream from her dairy cows. Now, I chose this picture of all the pictures because it's such a good example, again, of how my trip was like connected to the monarchs in these deeper ways. So in the foreground, Margaret's feeding me, and in the background, she's feeding pollinators. And so again, monarchs need to show up to every house in the United States, in Canada, in the summer and spring and fall, and they need to be able to find shelter, and they need to be able to find food. 100% exactly like a bike tourist. And so I can only imagine that this day when I show up at Margaret's, that there was a monarch too that was like relieved to find what they needed and to find this hospitality. I think if we frame gardens in our yards as just invitations to nature and being hospitable, or yeah, hospitable neighbors, that doesn't sound right, but you know what I mean. I think that's an important way to reframe how we think about landscaping. And it's important. But before I talk more about that, in case you're worried, I also got ice cream in the US. Someone one time was so worried that I hadn't gotten any ice cream in the US because I didn't include a picture of it. No, I got ice cream everywhere. I particularly love this story because I met Lynn and Erica in Mexico. They were tourists just like me. And they said, oh, we live in New York City. And I said, oh, I'm going to bike to New York City. And they said, sure you are. Here's our number. Call us. And I don't think they actually expected me to call them. And then when we did, I stayed with Erica, and then Lynn took us out for lunch, and then she took us out for ice cream, but she just described it as ice cream and a fish. And at first I was like, that sounds so disgusting. And I forgot to put up a photo. You have to Google Japanese ice cream and a fish. It's amazing. This is a bad example, but the cones are in the shape of fish, and it's really adorable. The other, I guess the last thing that kind of connected me to the monarchs was the fact that I was just out there every single day, seeing the world through their eyes. So every mile I biked, I was thinking about, where would a monarch go? Where could a monarch eat? Oh, look, there's milkweed. And I got really good at spotting milkweed going 10 miles an hour down the road. So here I am, here's some milkweed, and there is a 5th instar caterpillar. I'm going to zoom in on him. And this caterpillar was doing this amazing behavior where they would grab their frass, which is poo. These little nuggets are called frass, and they would throw their frass over the leaf. And I just was like in the ditch watching this. And if you back up, this is happening like a foot away. This is like Nat Geo worthy behavior. Like I'd never seen anything like this before. And my guess is they were just clearing that frass because when I was biking, I actually didn't see the 5th instar caterpillar first. The first thing I noticed was the frass. And when I see frass that big, I think there is a 5th instar on there. I'm going to look for them. So I'm guessing it was just another way to kind of stay a little more camouflaged. But this is happening so close to the road. And again, we just think of those roadside ditches as like a wasteland, as nothing. But this is, in a lot of places, and this was in Indiana, and this is the last habitat that is left. We have taken everything from the monarchs. And so I would be so thrilled to find this habitat full of life. And then of course, I would go down the road and see what was coming. And people always expected me to show up to a presentation or to their house, just like, yay, I'm following butterflies. I must always be happy. But I was honestly very, very angry. And it was just, I just slowly got more and more angry. And when people ask what was the hardest part, it was not the miles. It was not the weather. It was not hills. It was 100% just biking every day, hours and hours and hours, and looking at what we have given, what we've left to the future, to the monarchs. And it was just, I was just full of rage, and it was just everywhere all the time. And I think it's just so important to remember that every step that we take was monarch's land, and we stole it. And so much of the time we stole it so we could have some grass. And of course, grass is fine to have in patches, to go on a picnic, to let the dogs and the kids play, but like 90% of the grass that you see, that we take care of, that we water and mow and fertilize and put chemicals on, it's like, it's not helping anyone. And so it's so important to we have got to stop seeing these lawns as beautiful. It just doesn't work. It's not sustainable. It's not helpful. And it's quite frankly not being a good neighbor. Yes, it's being good neighbors to the humans that live down the street that are concerned about that sort of thing. But it's not being a good neighbor to our frog neighbors or our butterfly neighbors or our bird neighbors. And we have to remember that it's their land too. And we have to learn to share. And so if we could just start finding places that we're not using, give back, that's what we need to do. And if we don't, I mean, the science tells us what's happening. And so this is a graph of the monarchs over time. And you'll notice that, yes, it fluctuates up and down, but in general, over time, we're seeing downward trends. And Monarch Watch has a really good graph of this. I chose this one from Monarch Joint Venture. Their website is really, really awesome. If you're looking for really crystal clear information that's accessible, easy to read, very, very digestible, go to Monarch Joint Venture. But I like this graph because it includes on it this green line. And this green line is where scientists believe the population is stable, is sustainable. So you'll notice we haven't hit that line in quite a while, in like the last decade. And the way we're going to get that line is by making sure that the monarchs, when they arrive to Texas and Oklahoma, have enough milkweed to lay that first generation. I didn't mention that. The monarchs are multi-generational, which is like, I guess, the best hope for them, is because in a given season, if the monarchs arrive, if it's warm and if it's the good conditions in Texas, they can lay a generation. That generation will metamorphose over about a month, and then they'll continue the migration north, laying eggs for about 2 to 6 weeks. After they lay their eggs, they die, and we'll get between 3 and 5 generations. If every female lays 400 eggs, and even just 4 of those survive, well, that's doubling the population. So if you have 5 generations and each generation doubles the population, you can rebound really quickly. But you can only rebound if you start with enough, and if when they arrive, every female can find 400 milkweeds to lay her 400 eggs. And so that's how we're going to get to this line, is by making sure the females have enough milkweeds to lay their eggs. Now, we don't know where they're going to go every year because the migration shifts. So we can't just have one corridor with plenty of milkweed. We need to make sure that one year there's plenty of milkweed here. Oh, one year there's more of a drought, so they're gonna need to put more of their eggs in the eastern basket, if you will. So we need to have milkweeds everywhere. And the last number I heard was we need to plant 1.8 billion stems of milkweed. So I'm gonna say that one more time, 1.8 billion stems. We are not gonna get that waiting for state parks and wildlife refuges to get on board. The only way we're gonna get 1.8 billion stems in the ground is if we look to our own yards and we learn to share. So please, if you haven't already, get those milkweeds in the ground. You can start with seeds now. You can start with starts in the spring, but now is the time. We no more messing around. We got to just do this. So some of us don't have yards, and so I think it's really important to note that we all have a part to play in this. And for me, it was giving my voice to the monarch. And so that's what I started out with, was going to schools. I talked to about 9,000 people on my trip. That's why I have the book as well. But this is how I balance my debilitating rage with hope. And I think it's important to not forget about that rage, to not brush it away or to pretend it's not there, but it's to take that anger and say, let's do something. And that's truly the only way I get through the day, is by doing something. And the other thing that I do is I just surround myself with other people that care. And on my trip, it was just really inspiring how many people care. And sometimes they would not know that they were part of something bigger because they're just working on their one little garden, their one little spot. But I just love the thought that you all might be connected to someone I met because they planted milkweed and you saw that monarch, or vice versa. You guys have had a milkweed in your yard that raised up a caterpillar, and someone in Texas saw the great grandma of that butterfly. It's so beautiful for me to be able to connect those dots. So I met teachers planting gardens. Get a garden in the ground. They're so important. I met scientists. This is Chip Taylor. He started Monarch Watch, another great organization. They give milkweed out to free to schools. So if you want to start one of those gardens, talk to Monarch Watch. He's in this picture. He's 83. I forget exactly, 80. He's like at retirement age and he's still working so hard. And you know, sometimes I get so frustrated when people are like, oh, kids give me so much hope. It's like, no, that's not their job. Our job is to give them hope. And so I really got a lot of hope just meeting Chip and just seeing how he's devoted his life to this insect. And he's the reason that people care. And we owe it to him to continue that legacy. And of course I met farmers. These are the Niemans, they live in Texas. Bill started a landscaping company in the 80s, and he was, you know, putting in irrigation systems and watering, and there was a especially bad drought. And he went on his drive home and he'd see these plants thriving in these natural areas. And he thought, well, how is that possible? And that was kind of his first intro into natives. And now he operates with his family Native American seed farm, and they grow natives, harvest the seeds, and then sell the seed packets for anyone to help spread native. Such an inspiring family. I went to golf courses. Like, we have to be creative. This is a golf course where all of the rough, I think it was 6 acres of rough, is all native prairie. They save about, I think he said $300 a year per acre on water and mowing, and they still can golf. So this isn't like, again, it's about sharing. It isn't about saying we can't golf anymore. It's about saying let's share. And of course there's the backyard gardens. This is a small garden in Oklahoma, but man, small is okay. When I went there was already 40 eggs on these common milkweeds. And if just, again, one of those survives, that could be 400, 500 more eggs in the next generation. That could be thousands of eggs by the time they get to the upper Midwest. And so literally every garden matters. And again, we can share. We can still have a patio. We can still have ornamentals. We can still have some green grass for the dogs. But we got to start putting those natives in too. But bigger, of course, is better. And I really love this garden. This is in Columbia, Missouri. Such a good example of rethinking what beauty is. Like, I see NIAS garden and I'm just like so excited to explore. There's so much going on. There was so much life there. But I included a picture with her neighbor's yard because there's some milkweed here in her yard. And I asked Nadia about it, and she said, well, before the neighbors mowed down everything, and then they learned if there's no milkweed, there's no monarchs. So now they mow around this little section. And this is how the monarchs win, is by having a very brave person on every street, in every town, in every neighborhood, being that example, so that the ideas can spread, and so that the milkweed can literally spread. Like, this is how we're going to do it. And the good news is, if we do it, like, it's not a one-way street. It's not. Oh, actually, yeah, this will work for that. It's not a one-way street. Like, you put in these gardens, and you're going to be rewarded with beauty. Like, this is Val's garden, excuse me, and where does she live? In Joplin, Missouri. And look, if you plant these gardens, the monarchs will come. I actually visited Val this fall. I took my motorcycle from Kansas City to Mexico, and I took this picture in her yard. So this is some butterfly weed, milkweed, and there's a little chrysalis, and it was right next under her mailbox, and we were looking, I don't remember what we were looking for. It's a drought. The flowers in Oklahoma and Texas looked so sad, but there was this just a closed monarch. So this monarch had just eclosed and was drying his wings and was going to fly to Mexico, you know, right in the next few days. Only because Val, I'm going to back up, that's Val, only because Val made the choice to share her yard. Like, this butterfly exists entirely because of her. And maybe next year this butterfly will survive all the odds, and their great grandkids will make it up north to you all. So be thinking about that. It blows my mind. I guess here's another example of sharing. I changed up these slides a little, sorry. This is in a parking lot. Like, again, it doesn't have to be pristine. We don't have to just focus on state land. Literally, a parking lot can be home to some creatures if we give them that space. Even New York City, I was biking across the Brooklyn Bridge, And then I got into Manhattan and I chased down this butterfly because I wanted proof that if you plant it, they will come. And so here is a monarch in New York City. So no, if a monarch can survive New York City, which I barely could, then they can survive anywhere as long as we plant what they need. And like I said, if you plant, then they'll reward you. It's not just us giving, it's us giving and receiving. We give them space and they give us beauty, as I've mentioned. This is another type of milkweed called butterfly weed. That's a fairly popular ornamental, or not ornamental, but popular in ornamental settings, I guess would be the word. Another male. But the monarchs also give us, I want to say, I guess I'd call it adventure. I'm not really sure, like curiosity, because first, of course, you're going to notice the monarch, but then you're going to like start crawling around looking for the caterpillars. These are not monarch caterpillars. These are milkweed tussock moth caterpillars. And I have to brag about them for a second. They also eat milkweed. They also sequester the toxins in their bodies, which renders their adult form poisonous. But milkweed tussock moth adults are nocturnal. So being bright orange at night would be not very strategic. So they've actually developed what we call aposematic sound. So they have a warning organ, a sound that clicks, an organ that clicks a warning sound. So, it's so amazing. And like, that's a gift the monarch gave me because I did not know that before I started biking with them. Another gift is to see the whole picture. And again, you'll be crawling around looking for monarchs and you'll find an egg, or not an egg, you'll find it's not an egg. You'll find some eggs, looking for eggs. But you'll find spiders and ants. And sometimes I hear people say, oh, I want to take all the caterpillars inside and rear them in cages. And I'm always like, that's not how we're going to save monarchs. Yes, please rear a few inside so that you can like watch the process and you can share the process with your neighbor down the street or the kids at the school down the road. But the way we're going to save the monarch is by planting 1.8 billion stems of milkweed. And the good thing about planting 1.8 billion stems is that we'll have lots and lots of eggs, and 90% of them will get eaten by the spiders and the beetles and the wasps and the ants. But that's okay because these guys are one, very, very cute, if I may say so, but also we need them to feed the birds and to feed the frogs and to feed the food web. So it's important that some of those monarchs get eaten. The monarchs will also give you the gift of like recognizing that you're helping everyone. So this is a little froglet and some common milkweed. And remember, I love frogs. Harder to follow frogs. But by helping the monarchs, by planting milkweed, by getting that habitat in the ground, I am also helping frogs. And so if butterflies aren't your thing, I'm not offended. Choose whatever animal or plant speaks to you, which gets you excited, and then give them your time and your energy and your voice and your vote and your money, and in return you'll be helping my frogs and the butterflies as well. And helping the monarchs is going to give you friendships. I literally have friends across North America because of the monarchs, including my friend Brianda, who was my guide when the first time I visited the monarchs in Mexico. And after we went up to see them, we were just chatting and she invited me to her house. And then fast forward 3 years, I went to her wedding. Fast forward a week ago, I was at her mom's house. I've been living, I'm in Mexico. I'm not in Mexico right now, but I went down in the end of November, or the end of September, excuse me. I wanted to be there for Day of the Dead to see the monarchs arrive. And I'm back in the US for a little bit, and we'll head back down in a week or so and be there till the end of March, living at Brianda's mom's house. Brianda married, so she had to move out, but there's my bike in the background. And what a gift that is. And the monarchs that also give us this important gift of just remembering we can be part of something big, something bigger than us. And I think about this all the time. I think one butterfly can't move a branch, but when you get thousands together, look at these butterflies, their collective weight has actually bent this branch. So if butterflies can bend trees, then we can all plant a small garden. We can all use our voice to tell someone how incredible these animals are, or birds, or whatever that creature is that is important to you. And our actions together can be something big. And we can't forget it. Like, it can seem too small, it can seem silly and pointless, but look, the monarchs remind us that it's not. So all we have to do is plant that milkweed. Full disclosure, my milkweed died. There's a bit of a learning curve this first time, but stick with it, make it a game, make it fun. And if you do, the real adventures will come to you. And man, I follow these monarchs. My trip was in 2017, but I'm still following them. And I just want to wrap up with 2 adventures that I'm doing right now with them, and then I'll turn it over to questions. But the first adventure, see if I can make this video work here. This is what the monarchs do in the spring in Mexico. And that's called streaming. You'll see that they're all flying the same direction. It's a little shaky. I'm not a videographer, but you can see them leaving, and they're leaving the roost and they're flying down the mountain. And they'll actually leave the protected core of the mountain, and they'll fly into the villages, and they'll cross over houses. And I was watching that for the last few years. And in 2020, I trained 10 women that year to count the monarchs in an area near their house 3 times a day. And I collected the data, and I put little thermometers at each house. And now I'm working with Monarch Watch and with a professor from my old college, Humboldt State, to analyze this data and to better understand it. And this year I went back and trained more women, and I want to brag about my really fancy technology. This picture is a cut up tent that I had, and that's how we measure the wind. And then we use watches, which are these things that people put on their wrist to tell time, and paper to write down the information. So it's not very high tech, it's a lot of data entry, but I currently have 12 women counting monarchs, and I have thermometers linked up that are collecting real-time data. And there's one of these thermometers. So this woman is counting monarchs right now, Albertina, and then this thermometer is linked to a cell phone that I brought, and so it's giving me data every minute. And so it is a full-time job that I'm not getting paid for, but it's a lot of fun. I am paying these women, which is really important. It's not a lot, but it's work that they wouldn't otherwise have, and it's just another connection. One, they're discovering they're just observing the monarchs, and it's so fun to watch them notice things that even I haven't noticed, or make observations and be scientists. And then of course it's fun to see them happy to be working. And my other adventure continues to be my books. So this is the same book, but with a new cover. It's the paperback cover. I think one of the coolest gifts that this book gave me, that's not true, it's in the top 100 gifts, was one day I got an email from Dr. Jane Goodall, and that one of the quotes that she sent me is on the new book, as well as the seal for winning the National Outdoor Book Award. So lots of gifts coming my way for really just going out there. Remember that first picture of me in Mexico? Like, that somehow connected to this moment, which is really surreal. And then I included this picture because on my trip, the point was to talk to kids. And so this past month, I really doubled down and have been working on a version of my book for 10-year-olds, because that's who I really want to hear about all the silly adventures, and about how I really had just ignored all the old people telling me I was wrong. And so stay tuned for that. And then on this screen here, that's my website, beyondabook.org. And then I do have a GoFundMe for my monarch counting. I'm pretty much, I think, where I'm at, but I could always throw in another worker if I got enough money. So if you want to help that cause, feel free. And then, man, I just want to thank you all for sticking around, and thanks, Dawn, for setting this up. My voice is very quiet without help, so it's an honor to have an hour of your all's time. And with that, I'll answer questions if we have any. And I'll stop I'll stop sharing just so.
All right. Sarah, thanks so much. I'm going to go ahead and ask everybody to unmute if they want to ask questions. They can go ahead and unmute themselves and ask, and then we'll see if there's anybody that has any questions in the room here. Can you hear me okay? All right. Everybody should have the ability to unmute themselves if they want to ask a question. Anyone that's sitting here live, you don't need to be unmuted. So I was just curious, in that last picture showing the kids, what's been your experience with how the children react to your talk and that type of thing? Do they get pretty excited about it? Do they want to go out and plant milkweed, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, my favorite reaction is just the reaction of being like, oh wait, you can do that. And I think that's like where it starts. It's just getting permission to think outside the box. And for me, I know that like the first adventure I went on, I remember meeting people that were also doing adventures and hearing their stories and being like, oh my gosh, you could do that. In fact, I was on a bike tour and I met a guy. I was walking across the country and I met a guy who had canoed the Mississippi River. And I'm like, wait, you can do that? And that was all it took for me to plan a trip a few years later to canoe the Missouri River. And so I just loved planting that seed of like, what do you want to do? Like, who cares if no one's done it before? Just go do it. And if you fail, like that's probably going to be a really good story too. So let's have fun.
Yeah. So I'll toss it out here to anybody that's in the room with us. We've got, did anybody count? I don't know. We got 75. No, I'm just kidding. We got like 15, 8. Would you say 18? And then we had 20 or 25 people that were online. So really good turnout.
Yeah, I felt like I was sitting in the room with you all, but like facing a corner where I couldn't see any of you.
Rex, what's your question, Rex?
Have you ever seen Monterey, California?
I didn't hear it.
Were you able to, have you ever seen the monarchs in Monterey, California?
I went down the coast once and only saw a handful, but the monarchs in California they act a little differently. And I haven't seen lots and lots, and it varies year to year, and some interesting things are happening in California. You know, the 1 year you'll hear the population's like almost zero, and then the next year there'll be thousands. And I think they're still trying to work out really what's happening in California. The big issue is that their overwintering area is getting warmer, and so the monarchs are in sexual diapause when they're hanging from those branches, which means they're not reproductive. And that's spurred by the sunlight, milkweed that they ate as caterpillars, and also temperature. And so they can actually break diapause if they find a warm area with milkweed, or just even a warm area. And so warmer temperatures are kind of breaking diapause, and there's actually year-round mating, breeding monarchs that don't overwinter in California. And there's even been some theories that maybe they're overwintering higher up, where, you know, if it's hotter here now, you go up the mountain, it'll be a better climate for them. So a lot of stuff happening in California we don't really understand yet fully.
Is your book on the market now?
Yes, my adult book, Bicycling with Butterflies, has a paperback that's out in February, but the hardcover is out now, and audiobook and ebook. And you can find, I've been surprised where you can find it, so it's probably at the library too.
And then the kids book, when are the kids books going to be available?
I'm sending out letters to agents. I got really lucky with my adult book. I published an article in a magazine, and from that article, 6 publishers reached out to me, and 2 offered me contracts. So I was able to be like, well, they're doing this, and so I had a little bit of power in that, but I haven't been that lucky this time. So I'm looking for an agent, but I've written the first draft through, and I'm pretty happy with it.
You know, I'm curious. I think it's great, you know, monarchs are getting all this press, but how are monarchs doing? Or I guess I should say, how are other butterflies doing? I mean, you know, everything is in decline, and monarchs have gotten press, but are other butterflies declining as steeply as the monarchs?
I think that the thing with the monarchs is that since there were so many, it's easier to track these changes, and because people are counting them, like that's the other thing, because you gotta have data, and it's hard to count butterflies when they're spread out. And so the monarch is actually presents a certainly it's a challenge, but it's a maybe easier, a more surmountable challenge than surveying the prairie, which is just go to a small area and count the number of trees occupied. So I don't know the specifics on other species, but if you lose your habitat, you don't stand a chance. So I think some people are like maybe cynical about how much publicity the monarch has. I fully embrace it, and I'm okay with it because I call them gateway bugs. So you start out with the monarchs, and then you learn about the milkweed tussock moths, and then you go from there. And all of a sudden, I mean, I stay with people that know way more about butterflies than I do. It's easier when you stay in one spot. I tend to move a lot, which makes it hard, but yeah, I can't be more specific. But I'm happy if someone is a butterfly expert in the crowd to turn over the discussion to other folks too.
Are monarchs international, or are they pretty much North America, South America?
There's monarchs in Spain and New Zealand, Australia. There's a debate on how they got there. Some people believe that they winged and flew. Others think that they came on plants with the trade. But yeah, so when we talk about monarchs as a species, their scientific name is Danius plexippus. The migrating North American monarchs that go from Mexico to Canada and back, their subspecies Danius plexippus plexippus. So you might have heard about the IUCN listing, which everyone thought was the Endangered Species Act. It wasn't, it was something else. But they listed Danius plexippus plexippus, meaning, and by listing it, they're just doing an inventory of as many animals and plants as they can to get a general report card of the health of the planet and diversity. And they determined Danius plexippus plexippus to be endangered, but not Danius plexippus because they're all over.
Hi, this is Daryl, and I'm on Zoom in Miami. And I don't think I've ever seen a butterfly down here. Would they be in the Everglades? And
Yes.
Does milkweed grow in Florida? Good heavens.
Yes to both. So the monarchs on the monarchs will fly up the Midwest, and kind of the Corn Belt is where they historically were most concentrated. The Corn Belt is now eaten up with corn, and European settlers kind of cut that eastern forest, upper Midwest forest, and prairie moved in. So the monarchs kind of have followed that disturbance, and the milkweed has followed the disturbance. But the other thing is that prevailing winds will push them east. So typically you'll see them fly more north, and then they'll get pushed east. And then in the fall, some will follow the Appalachians more inland, and other monarchs will follow the eastern seaboard. And some of those monarchs will get funneled into Florida, and they'll kind of get stuck in Florida. They won't quite understand that they got to go north in order to go south. And so what's interesting about Florida is historically, there would be a freeze of a couple days, which would be enough time, even just a short cold snap, to kill those monarchs. But because of climate change, some winters, and that's becoming more frequent, those monarchs aren't dying. So they're staying there over winter. And then the other issue is that if the cold snap doesn't kill the milkweed, there's also, or kill the monarchs, also the milkweed won't die back. So there's just kind of a twofold thing happening there, and it's like one of those things where we're kind of waiting to see exactly what happens and how it all sorts itself out.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. Thanks.
Thank you.
The question is was the origin in the Midwest, or where are they originally from? Do we know that, or?
The monarchs are a tropical species, and there was this plant called milkweed that was kind of expanding northward after the last ice age, and the monarchs wanted to take advantage of that food source, but if they stayed in the north, they'd freeze to death. So there was like this evolution of moving further north in the summer to monopolize that milkweed, and then going back to warmer climate in the winter.
What kind of special
Carol was saying, I don't know if you heard that, but she says she and two neighbors have milkweed plants, and was it last year they've had, monarchs and stuff like that, but last year they didn't have any monarchs. What would be the reason for that? Any idea?
So there's this really amazing website called Journey North, and it's a monarch. It's actually more like an animal plant tracking website, but I mostly have explored the monarch side of it. But basically, anyone, you all could join too, and you can put in the first monarch you see of the season, the first milkweed sprout you see of the season, first egg you see, and with that data you can go through however many years you want, and they have these maps where they'll like have dots for each kind of week. So it'll start yellow and go to red for the spring migration, and you can watch the dots move. And what's amazing is some years it's just straight north, and other years it's more east, and other years it's more west, and it really does vary. And that's why it's so important that we have that habitat ready for them everywhere, because we don't know exactly where it's going to go. And when I did my trip in 2017, there was an interesting thing that happened, that this wind blew the monarchs north way early. So people in Texas and Oklahoma, yes, they saw them, but in way lower numbers because they just rushed past. And I mistakenly, I'm just like, I don't know, it sounds like a good thing, a head start. And everyone's like, no, that's bad, because monarchs are cold-blooded. So if they lay their eggs farther north in March and April, May, it's way colder in the north. So development is slower. There's more chances of a freeze. We want those monarchs to have the first generation in Texas, so that they'll develop quickly, they'll metamorph quickly, and they'll be able to get that first generation out and double the population quickly. So it really just, it varies. Which I guess the last thing I'd want to say is this is what makes the monarchs like hopeful to survive, is if there is a drought in Texas, there'll be some monarchs somewhere else. And if there's a drought or if there's flooding in Georgia, well, Texas might be better. And so again, like, because they spread out, and you didn't see one year, but they were likely around. They kind of as a way to kind of hedge our bets.
How long do monarchs live?
The monarchs that are born in the spring and summer, they typically take about a month to go from egg to adult, and then they live 2 to 6 weeks. The monarchs that overwinter, we call them the super generation, they live about 8 months.
Got some area around our house where milkweed has thrived, and last year there was none at all. I was curious, and there's no pesticides.
The milkweed didn't survive? Is it?
It never came back. I was curious.
Yeah, they had a large area of milkweed and then it just didn't come back last year for some reason. Is there other pests, that type of thing that would have?
There's other animals that eat milkweed, but typically native milkweeds will have this really elaborate root system. And so if there's a bad year, if there's a drought, for instance, they might not flower, they might die back early, but their underground roots will kind of overwinter, over hardship, whatever that might be. One thing that could be is there is an annual species of milkweed called tropical milkweed that is very popular, and it won't come back. It could self seed, but it won't come back after the winter. No, it's not native to here. I recommend avoiding it. But other than that, I can't keep track of all the possible things in such a wide area. But if someone in the crowd might have an answer too, I'm happy to to crowdsource.
I'm going to turn you back over to Don.
Just wanted to thank you, Sarah, for your passion, your enthusiasm, and spending your time with us. You are an inspiration in so many different ways. So we appreciate everybody coming out tonight. We are going to have some announcements afterwards. People on the Zoom hang out there with us. So again, thank you very much, Sarah. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and thanks to everyone out there.
Thank you.
Keep up the
Thank
work.
you.
Thank you. Excellent.